You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at No Schedule Man on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /No Schedule Man. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
Hi, I'm Kevin Bulmer. Thank you for finding us. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Today, my guest is Alfredo Caxaj. Alfredo is the executive and artistic director of an incredible event called Sunfest, which takes place annually in July here in London, Ontario, Canada. Now, not only is it, in my opinion, the most significant annual event in this city, but Sunfest has become one of the most respected events of its kind, not only in the entire country, but it certainly is now rightfully viewed as one of the preeminent world music festivals anywhere on the globe. For many days and nights every July, Sunfest fills our downtown with a celebration of sounds, smells, and sights that bring together a spirit of love and togetherness that is so entirely welcome when it's here, and all too fleeting once it's concluded. With the incredible combination of top-level world music of all kinds, international artistic vendors, and authentic foods from around the globe, Sunfest has become really a can't-miss event in this part of Ontario, Canada. Now, having worked in event management for a few years earlier in my career, I've always been somewhat awed by the scale of Sunfest. And now that I'm fortunate enough to know Alfredo and some of his team members that bring it to life every year, I'm even more impressed and grateful that it's part of the community where I live and am raising my kids. In this conversation, Alfredo takes us through the whole story of how Sunfest came to be, what it has become, because it's more than just the festival every July, and where it's going. And perhaps even more fascinating than that is his story of what obstacles he and his family had to overcome to even be here in the first place, and how he held fast to the one thing that always brought harmony and peace to his soul: music. I've known Alfredo for several years now, and I'm lucky to be able to call him my friend, but I found out that there was much that I did not know about this wonderful, gentle man. As you'll hear, right from the very first question that I ask, Alfredo's story is one from which we can all learn. I'm so grateful I got to spend this time with him. I hope you enjoy hearing what he has to say. Here is my conversation with the executive and artistic director of Sunfest, Alfredo Caxaj, on the No Schedule Man podcast. How did you end up in London to begin with?
Well, Kevin, I came to Canada as a political refugee with my wife and my son, which at that time was only 2 years old. I arrived here in 1985. And what happened is we left Guatemala, our original country, under very difficult circumstances. At that time, we were under the pressure of a strong dictatorship, and so we were involved in the popular movement, and we both were teachers, my wife and I. And during all that period, I could say that pretty much every Guatemalan family was affected by one way or another, and our family was not the exception. I ended losing 2 brothers in this political struggle, and because our family case was one of those cases that was, extremely well known. At that time, the Canadian Embassy used to have a group of people who were monitoring, all these political cases. And they came to us and they offered us, to refuge in Canada. And basically what they said is, we could send you to some of the major cities like Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, but we highly recommend you London, Ontario, because it's a city that is not that big, it's not small. It will have everything that you need. A quiet city in many aspects, and then you'll be able to raise a family in a good way. And we just follow their advice, and that's why we ended in London, Ontario.
So what happened then? 1985, I believe you
said. That's correct,
right?
Yes.
So what can you tell me about what life was like in the time immediately after you ended up here?
Oh, well, initially we were, relieved that in a way we were saving our lives by coming into Canada. We didn't really know. Well, we knew something about Canada in the past. We learned, through school, the big lakes, the Rocky Mountains and the snow, all that kind of stuff. But coming to Canada in the very first days, obviously, full of curiosity, right? But I think the very first cultural shock actually happens at the moment that we arrived at the airport. There were some immigration officers waiting for us, and they had all kinds of clothing, winter clothing, because it was November when we arrived. And they have coats, they have socks, boots, and we were asking through the translator, why should we need to put all this stuff on? Because we have our clothing and so on.
Had you ever been in a wintry climate before?
Never. I mean, it was funny because we, on our way to Canada, we have to make a stop in Miami. And of course, Miami, the temperature was over 35 degrees, and we stayed almost there for a day. And then coming here, and when these people said, you better put those things on. And when we went out, we just couldn't believe how cold it was. I think it was only -1, -2 by that time. But for us, that was a totally extreme weather conditions, because we had never experienced anything like that.
Well, and if it was November, you were just at the start of it, right?
Totally.
Welcome to Canada.
Well, 1985, we are talking about, when winters were actually stronger for what they are now. But, the next following week, I remember it was the first winter storm. And of course, initially, we were very curious about the snow and how to feel it, to touch it, and blah, blah, blah. But after several days, we were just thinking, when is stuff going to be gone? Because, that was too much for us. So that was one of the first, let's say, cultural shocks that we experienced. And of course, I think one of the most negative experiences that I remember, it happens actually the following day after our arrival. Someone working for an NGO was waiting for us at this hotel where we were staying, and the following day they took us into what they used to call the Manpower building, which is the federal building here in town. So basically it was to register ourselves and get a kind of a social insurance number, that kind of stuff. But our luggage did not arrive, so we told this lady through a translator that we needed some clothing, and at that time they used to give you about $500 per person to go and buy clothing at the old Zeller's store on Dundas Street in Richmond. So, and when she noticed that we didn't have our luggage, she actually doubled up, the amount. So we went to the store, and the person said to us, the translator said, you can take whatever you want as long as you don't go over the limit. And I said, but that is perfect. So I saw a very nice kind of a leather jacket, and I said, can I take this? And he said, yeah. As I said, you don't go over the limit, you'll be fine. Anyway, the moment that we went to do all the exchange, the lady who was doing that immediately told the translator that I couldn't take that jacket. And the translator asked why, because that's another kind of jackets that refugees are wearing, That's what she said. And I said, I like the jacket, and I don't want to wear that or the jacket that she's asking me to get. And I said, anyway, we were strong and we stay in our position. But she was so angry, so mad that I had taken that jacket, because she just thought that jacket wasn't for me. It was, we were not the right people, too. So I asked the translator, is Canada like this, that suffering this kind of, because I really felt that was the very first discriminatory attitude, racist attitude from someone. And I tell you, those very 4 or 5 years, very difficult in dealing with issues of discrimination and racism. As you can imagine, 30 years back, London wasn't as diverse as it is right now. But so we were, like strange people coming into this community, and it was tough. It was really difficult. Discrimination at all levels. My wife took a course at Financial College, and she was like, the only person of color among all these students, and she suffered a lot through all those experiences as well, because my wife was taking a course that, we both were had a university degree, and she was really good in sciences, and she was taking these science courses. And of course, science is the same everywhere. Mathematics is the same everywhere. And she was getting all these A plus all the time. And then people start saying, how is it possible that she doesn't even speak English well and she's getting all these marks? But what happened is, you imagine, all these kids going out from high school into college, and then my wife had already a university degree in sciences and physics. For her, all those courses were so easy. But the first assumption was, well, she's from somewhere else. She's a different color. She speaks with an accent. How is it possible that she can get all those high marks? So it was very tough for her as well to deal during those 3 years that she was at college. And again, those are the kind of experiences that not only us, but so many people who came to this country as either immigrants or refugees had to experience.
So you're forced into a situation where you're away from home, and I'm guessing that you were probably wanting to try to embrace the new place where you were, but certainly the weather did not put out the welcome mat for you.
Not at all.
And then your first shopping experience did not do that, and then certainly, we have evolved as a culture a lot, but I think, in my opinion, we still have a long way to go. But back to the thought, things were working against you, it sounds like, for you to really want to be able to embrace where you were. How did you and your wife handle that in those first few years, to stay positive and continue moving on in your lives?
Well, obviously, as I said initially, the fact that we had been able to save our lives, that was something that definitely we always put into context, because Guatemala is still at that moment in very difficult circumstances. Of course, our relatives were so happy that we were out of the country, because, they knew that something was going to happen to us if we hadn't left the country. So that was always something, that kept the balance, let's say, in perspective, dealing with all these difficulties, these challenges that at the same time. But I can tell you, it was kind of a very balanced thing, because for moments, the balance was going in the other direction, saying, it is tough getting into this new community. If we're going to die here, we better die in our country, And I remember that I think it's been the case, but especially for women, always has been even more challenging than men, when we're in these kind of circumstances. And I remember my wife all the time saying, I'd rather to go back than going through all these bad things that we're going. It's fine that we have access here to everything, but we're secure. But on the other hand, dealing with all these issues. So anyway, I think the whole idea of that we were safe and that we, and personally speaking, well, that put things in, that balanced things in, and that helped us a lot to go through the first 4 or 5 years. And then he came to the decision, Kevin, of saying, well, we can really move from one place to another, and our kids need some kind of stability. And that's when we say, well, you know what, let's stay here. And I think it's going to be much better for our kids to grow up in this environment, even though they were going to face, we knew that they were going to face similar kind of challenges that we face, as adults. But on the other hand, it was going to give them another kind of stability, It wasn't going to be fun for them that my wife and I moved from one place to another, because that was going to be very tricky. So that's basically what happened in just 5 years after. Say, let's stay here and see how we can deal with this.
I want to acknowledge, it almost seems as if we should talk a little bit more about what was going on in Guatemala at the time, but I also kind of don't want to, because I think that could probably be a few conversations all its own. And I'm more interested in talking about my friend Alfredo Caxaj and Sunfest and some of these things. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that so that anybody that's listening doesn't think that I'm trying to diminish the importance of that, but I don't know if we really want to go into that amount of detail. Suffice it to say that it was serious enough that, as you had said, you lost a couple of family members and needed to get out. I mention that, Alfredo, because I don't know that somebody, for instance, I've lived in London my entire life, mm-hmm. and it is one of the reasons why I value conversations like this and friendships like yours so much, is that I can't imagine that perspective, and so I don't want to just gloss over that. Mm-hmm. But invite people that their circumstances maybe are a little bit more similar to mine, that they've been in the same city or the same country or even just the same sort of similar culture for most of their lives, to just pause for a moment and consider having your entire lives uprooted. It's difficult to raise kids at the best of times.
Absolutely.
I'm already thinking about the laundry I've got to do later and the activities they have that I've got to get to on time. It's difficult for me to imagine being completely uprooted and put into an entirely different part of the world where I'm the outsider and allowed to flourish. And so just, if you're listening, just consider that for a moment as we continue to tell Alfredo's mm-hmm. story. Because mm-hmm. you got then now back to where we were. Mm-hmm. You say it was about 5 years in. That was it just a matter of acceptance? We've weighed the pros and cons. We've even thought about going back to where we were. Mm-hmm. There are things that are happening here that we don't like, but maybe we'll accept that this is the way that this is, and we're going to look for the best in it, and then see if we can make each day better than the last. Was it as simple as that?
No, not really, but I think it's something that I forgot to mention. It was always important for us to hear was the feedback from our relatives, like our parents, and saying, you know what, you're facing those issues there, but you better stay there. It's not safe at this moment for you to come back. We don't want to lose you. There were those strong words always coming from there, and Kevin, I think it's, I wouldn't mind speaking about that, but I think what is important to put in perspective is the fact that I wasn't able to go back to Guatemala until 14 years after I arrived in Canada, because simply I was not allowed to go back to Guatemala because we were some kind of a blacklist, And the very first time that I went back, which was in 1998, I decided to go back because two people from CBC, journalists, were going to Guatemala at that time. The peace agreements had just been signed, and there were a lot of international NGOs in Guatemala, observing these peace agreements. And I just thought this is the perfect moment for me to go back and feel safe in the company of two Canadian journalists. And that's what I did. I did go back. It was. They wanted to do a radio show specifically about my experiences and all these emotions of going back after so many years. And of course, it was very emotional, to go back to Guatemala 14 years later. And the funny thing is that when I came back, I remember the London Free Press made a huge story about myself. The front cover of the paper, because I did a presentation about that trip with these two journalists from CBC here in London. And that was perhaps, Kevin, the very first time that people knew why I was living in London, Ontario. Why did I come to London? Because my story really had not been published, in such a way before. That people saw me playing music, organizing events, doing all of this, and people were just getting the idea that I was having the greatest time of my life here in Canada without knowing, the reasons behind why we have to move to Canada. And I remember that day that the story came out, I got a tremendous amount of phone calls, people crying on the phone, saying, we had no idea of what you had gone through. And because the impression, the perception that we have about yourself is that you're just enjoying life in Canada as its best because you do this, you do that in the community, blah, blah, blah. And of course, when I came, I wasn't going to go into every single house and saying, this is my story, Eventually the story came out, and that happens at that time. And then people realize, why my wife and I moved to Canada. So it's, it's one of those things that sometimes you don't like to talk about, but sometimes you just feel that it's so crucial and important for people to know, because not everything is easy in this community and in this country. I've seen the changes in all these years, how things have become more difficult, economically speaking, for people and all those things. But at the time that we came 30 years back, the demographic conditions here in especially in London were so different from what they are now. And London, I can tell you, London is not necessarily one of the most friendly cities in Canada. When it comes to people that comes from other countries, everyone has. You talk to a lot of people from other countries, and they always say the same thing. They just don't feel sometimes that they are welcome in this community. And as I say, things have changed, but I think it's still a long way to go.
It's interesting to hear that. Too bad to hear that, obviously, for the situations that you've had to go through. But that's also going to bring us a little bit forward to where I'm hoping to go with the conversation, in the effect that I perceive that you and the people that work with you are having in affecting that change in the community and in our country. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, though. I'd like to go back again to that part where you and your wife sort of made the decision, okay, we're going to stay here. Mm-hmm. And then there was a window there. I think you had said that was about 5 years in, so you're still 9 years away from going back to Guatemala again when the story came out. In between those 2 points, what were some of the things that started to change for you and your family?
Well, I think we start getting some kind of, for example, from my perspective, I was able in 1990 actually started working for a local NGO, the Cross Cultural Learner Center. And when I started working there, I was able to identify different ways of getting engaged with the community, and also identify ways of doing what I really loved always in my life to do. I didn't mention this, but I was a professional musician in Guatemala as well. And during all these, the very first years, I think I met some Canadian, some musicians here in London, and we started playing music. And music for me was as an incredible mental therapy, that really helped me to go through all of this. When I got to this NGO, I was able to, discover different agencies that support the arts in Canada, and then I was able to make all those kind of connections. And all of a sudden, I was organizing, concert series, and then I started feeling that, this is something not only that is giving me a lot of satisfaction, but on the other hand, I'm also doing something for the community. I'm enhancing the cultural, social, and political life of this community. And I said, well, maybe this is the way to go. On the other hand, my wife had started working professionally speaking. I would say that perhaps conditions for herself were a little bit more difficult than mine. But those things, in sending our kids to French immersion school, them learning another language, and knowing the advantage that they want to learn, want to be trilingual, all those kind of little things, were coming together and making us feel, well, perhaps this isn't going to be the best thing for us, but probably for our kids, this will be one of the best possible ways for them to survive. And I think we did that in a way, accomplish all of that with our children, and those things are really the things that make us feel, well, stay here then, let's. And actually, my wife and I said, well, when the kids get to the majority of age, we will decide if we go back or we stay here, But in the meantime, let's support them until we can, and then when they are adults enough to make the decisions, then we can feel free to saying, let's go back to Guatemala or stay here. So those kind of motivations, Kevin, were the ones that really help us to survive all those difficult. And after 30 years of being here, I can still tell you, still 100% fully satisfied. Because one incredible thing, and this is what people don't know sometimes, there is a big difference between an immigrant and a refugee. The immigrant comes because they have made a decision on their own. Said, I want to move to that country, I want to move to this other country. But the refugees is a little bit different. Refugees are forced by whichever conditions, to move into a specific land, not necessarily because of their choice.
Yeah. And
this is exactly what happened every time that we go back to Guatemala with our wife. We enjoy our time with 2-3 weeks being with our family and so on. But after a while, you start feeling that you don't belong there anymore. But what happens is when you come back here, you still feeling the same. And that's why a lot of people say, that they had studied all these cases of refugees, political refugees. One of the hardest kind of torture sometimes is to live in exile. Because sometimes you feel you don't belong to one particular place. You're living between cultures and places. And sometimes it's difficult for you to identify. There is no question, Kevin, we love this country. The generosity that we've been finding in an incredible number of people. But I think all those conditions, that force us to leave Guatemala, is still they're very strong, and obviously something that we will never forget.
Who knows why things happen and work out the way they do? It's been my opinion since the day that I met you that you're a gift to anybody that, I mean that very sincerely.
Thank you.
Being around you is like being around a little bit of sunlight. You have such a gentle soul, and what the positive part of the positive part, in my opinion, of having been in this community for all of my 40-something years now, is I've had a front row seat to watch it change. And I think I have a fairly informed opinion of the kind of improvement that efforts like yours have brought to not just this community, but to the lives of the people that live in it. I think I've told you parts of stories before of my own children. So at the time that we're recording this, I have 2 boys that are 13 and 9. Mm-hmm. Alfredo, they don't know a world without Sunfest. And I dropped my son off at the bus stop this morning, picked one of his friends up, and he is from another culture completely. And it doesn't even enter my older son's mind that that's the case. He's just Joey.
Absolutely.
He's his buddy. And so when we tour Victoria Park every year, and again, I am jumping ahead, I think that this is such an incredible, wonderful gift of progress that they just have the opportunity to be immersed in these different worlds and taste different cultures and see different people. And it's not strange to them. It's embraced. It's becoming part of their DNA and who they are. Now multiply that by hundreds of thousands of people year after year. Now, I'm not trying to diminish in any way all of the challenges that you and your family have had to endure. But my gosh, when you look back at a life well lived, one can never really measure the impact that they have on those around them. And I think that for you, hopefully you'll go away, at least from this conversation, feeling a little bit of that lightness in your own soul of thinking, gee, I'm just doing what I'm doing to try to live my life and get by and do the best job we can, because any of us are. But my goodness, Alfredo, you've been an incredible gift to this community, and I hope that you've been able to see that a little bit through some of your efforts. And you mentioned about the music and how that had always been a therapy. Now I've taken control of the conversation. Funny, but I've often said that if laughter is the universal language, then music must be a close second.
Absolutely.
So would you please tell me a little bit more specifically about your involvement in music, and then maybe even how that led into what eventually became Sunfest?
Yes, I was fortunate enough of growing with in a family that my father was a professional singer in Guatemala, and also my uncles. So they used to play together, and they used to listen to a lot of, especially Mexican music. And we grew up in that environment, listened to. And then some of our men, my brothers and myself, we started getting into music, learning instruments and singing all the time. So we started playing music and rock bands and that kind of stuff in Guatemala, and eventually it ended playing more professionally. One of my brothers, actually, he lives in San Francisco now, but he used to play with all the top-notch groups in Guatemala. So music always was around us, and precisely when I came here, I met a friend from El Salvador and said, "Yeah, let's play music," because he also was a professional musician in El Salvador. So we started playing music together, and eventually through the through those gigs, we were able to meet some friends from London. It was actually the opening of a Galleria Mall.
Wow.
Where we had, probably you remember that thing was kind of a sensational thing in London.
I do remember that.
People lining up to getting into Galleria Mall, the first official day. But the night before, they had done some kind of private opening. And so they match stations of food with type of music. So we were playing there with our band, and then other bands were. There were about 5,000 people. I remember that night, and the mall looked fantastic, blue. And we met some musicians there, and then we became friends, and then we formed this salsa band, Herencia Latina. That was in 1989, and that was a big sensation in London, the salsa band. Apparently, it was one of the first salsa bands that was created in Canada, period. There was only one salsa band in Toronto at that time, and I believe there was one in Vancouver. But, we were some kind of pioneers in that way. And we were two Latin Americans, my friend from El Salvador and myself, and the rest were Anglo-Saxons, learning all this Latin music. So, anyway, and because of that, and at the moment that I started working in this NGO, I saw the connection, and I met this professor from a University Western, Mr. Bob Hughes. And Bob took me for the first time to Toronto to a concert of percussion from all over the world. Mr. Hughes had been in Africa studying African percussion, and then he said that I'm going to take you to Toronto and see this concert. And that concert was really the concert that really changed my life in this country, I would say. Because when I saw that, and I saw all these performers coming from all over together, I said to Mr. Hughes, it would be fantastic to do something like that in London. I said, yeah, he said, we could do it. He always had the enthusiasm, but he had never really found the partner, to go ahead and do this. And I said, you know what? I think we have the chances of getting some money from some of these institutions. Why not we do that? And then we created this committee, which was called the Cross-Cultural Arts Committee. And then we started putting together all these events, these concerts. And then when we saw the reaction of people, so positive, of seeing for the first time a group from South India, or a Japanese taiko drumming group, or a salsa band, we thought, well, this is fantastic, it could be nice to expand this into a summer and make it a summer festival. And he said, yes, but you will have to find other people because that's a lot of work. And so we used to have a committee of about 4 or 5 people, and basically all of them left. Said, we'll continue with this series, but if you're gonna do the festival, good luck, because that's a lot of work. And I said, really? Yeah.
Smart people, huh?
Yeah. So exactly. So I 1994, I tried to put together the festival in 1994, and we couldn't get enough financial resources in place, and so we said we better postpone it because we want to come up in 1995 strong, establish the event.
Mm-hmm.
And establishing the event is going to be so crucial that then we'll just grow from there. And that was the primary goal. And that's why we decided to postpone it from 1994 to 1995. And I think it was the right move, And for years, I myself was watching that particular weekend, saying, this weekend doesn't rain. This weekend doesn't rain. So this is a perfect weekend for this. And so when I went to the city hall and get in touch with the person in charge of parks and recreation, a very lovely person, I remember, he said, we'll give you all the kind of support that you need. He said, we'll give you the park. Yes, this is fantastic. We're talking about 1994 when, there was only one more festival at that time, which is Home County. There was nothing else. But all these music series that we had done in the previous years, they were creating some kind of a buzz in the community that,
mm-hmm.
Something different is coming too. So anyway, so 1994, we couldn't do it, but I have to tell you, Kevin, that during all those years, people were just coming to me saying, you want to do this thing in London? This is not going to work. You're crazy. Just forget about that. And I said, well, we'll see what happens.
I'm going to stop you for a second, just for the benefit of somebody that's listening that doesn't have any concept of what we're talking about, of London, which, gosh, at that time the population would have been what, maybe 250, 280,000 people, maybe 300-ish?
No, it was 240.
Yeah, so it's around 400-ish now, but down there, about that.
Yeah.
Victoria Park is the park that you're talking about, that right in the middle of the city. And so you had gone to the city and said, here's something that's never happened before, but this is what my vision is that I want to do. And you already did a great job of describing what the city had kind of been like from the time that you arrived in 1985. So 10 years later now, you're talking about putting on a multicultural event right in the heart of the city.
Yes.
I love how this is going. But now that people have a little bit of context, and it's July, it's usually the second weekend in July, that was the one that you were looking at. You think, okay, we're about, a week outside of the Canada Day holiday, and it doesn't seem to rain as much there. People will argue that there are no summer weekends without rain, but they won't be completely accurate. It just seems that way sometimes. But what then was your vision in your head of what you originally wanted to do in 94 and then decided to put to 95?
Mm-hmm.
How best can you describe what that was going to look like, or what you were hoping how it was going to look and work when you first got it off the ground?
Yeah, well, Kevin, the years prior to that, in playing with the salsa band, we were invited to different festivals at that time.
Okay.
And when I visited those festivals, especially one in Hamilton, that used to be called the Earth Song Festival, was kind of a multicultural event as well. And when I went to that park and I saw the different stages, the different food stands, the different crafts and so on, and that's when I started thinking, I would love to see something like that in London. However, the big difference, I always said, is going to be the musical quality, the music, because we used to go into those festivals and some groups were okay, some groups were, locally amateur, and I said, I want to really stay away from that format where people come with their beautiful costumes, and beautiful dresses on, but they are amateur dancing with recorded music. I said, I don't want to do that. I want to do something really professional working with professional artists. And that was the big difference between what we actually started doing here with the festivals of that nature at that moment. So that I said artistic quality, professional artist, and 2 or 3 stages. And this is exactly what that was my vision. And I always thought this is gonna work. It's gonna be tough for the very first years, but I'm pretty sure that this is gonna work. And I was so convinced that this was gonna work. And to make things really bad, that first year, that weekend, it rained for a day and a half.
See?
And they said, "Oh, it didn't rain the previous years, and it rained." But anyway, I think the day and a half left with sun saved us, and it was more than enough for people to say, "Wow, this was good. This was great." And a lot of people were complimenting, and saying, "Well, keep up and see what happens." So, no question, always the first time is the most difficult one to do it. And but I think I truly accomplished what I wanted that year, to leave the impression that this is something new, something professionally done. And even our promotion was, I remember the poster, when it came out, it was, I remember getting phone calls from medical clinics or lawyers' office saying, "Can we get a copy of that poster? Because that poster looks fantastic, that poster looks amazing." And so we were delivering all these posters to all these, offices and stuff like that, because it really created a big buzz in the community that, this is. And then there was a kind of a article in the paper weeks in advance that, I think people were at that moment were really dying for something new and fresh, and I think it came in the right moment. And after that, it was just a matter of continue building. It hasn't been an easy road for sure, not at all. We've been facing all kinds of challenges, but I think what we established in 1995 was good enough to grow from there.
How did you come up with the name Sunfest?
Yeah, actually, it was our good friend, guitarist. You probably know him, Oliver Whitehead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because he was playing in my band, and one day we were sitting at his house. He actually kept all these minutes and notes. He has a file with all these draws and so on. When we were discussing, how should we call this festival? How should we do this? And all of a sudden he said, "Oh, what about the Fest of the Sun? Oh, Sunfest. Sunfest sounds good." Anyway, he was the one who came up with that name, and that's when we came up with that name. We said, "Okay, we need to create a logo that really identifies this." We love the name Sunfest, no question about that. And then we chose the sun because, Kevin, the sun is a universal symbol in all cultures. Sun is the symbol of energy, of unity, of power. And just that the sun, it's gonna work. It has to work. The main goal will be to bring all these communities together, and so we created a contest. We called for submissions, and so people start sending us all kinds of suns, to different figures, graphics of the sun, and we got this one, that our current logo, but it had a dark background. So I called kind of a jury, saying, can you come and help me to jury all these, submissions? And all of us liked that particular sun, but there was something there that it didn't really work. And say, yeah, this is good, but so in that little room where we were judging all these things, there was a boy, and this boy passed by and said, "Oh, look at the moon," and said, and made us think at the moment. Said, "The moon. What about if we ask the artist to change the background to blue?" Because we really like the image, and so we went to the artist and said, "Can you do that?" And then he came out with, "Oh, this is perfect. This is what we need. This is what we want." and so all those little elements, all these historical things, it's amazing when you think about this. It's amazing, I remember we had 25 vendors that first year, we struggling in getting people to be part of the festival, but we knew that after that, these vendors, they have a network of vendors, they communicate with each other, and eventually this was gonna continue growing, and we saw the big difference from one year to another. 1996, the numbers of people were just unbelievable. We're talking about maybe 10,000-15,000 people, because in the first year we probably got 4,000 or 5,000 people during the 3 days, but the second year was a huge jump, and we just saw, yes, this definitely can be. But always the main goal, Kevin, apart from presenting something artistically speaking well, nicely done, I think personally my main goal was to do something that could really reflect what this country is all about. Because the very first time that I went to Toronto, I just couldn't believe how diverse Toronto was. And I actually asked my friends who took me to Toronto, are these tourists? Or do these people live here in Canada? I said, no, they live here. Because the image that I had about Canada was the English and the French, and nobody else. So when I went to Toronto, I said, wow, what is this? This is amazing. And that really, I think if there is something that has been the most significant thing for me in this country, always has been the opportunity, the window of opportunities that has created in terms of learning so much and interacting with people of many cultural backgrounds. And I think that's the beauty of this country, and that's precisely what the main vision of the festival was, to reflect in a professional manner, what this country is all about.
I'm thinking back to the mid-90s from when you started all of this, and I have to chuckle going all the way back to your story about the Galleria Mall.
Yeah.
Some people of a newer generation will not recall the pomp and circumstance that was. But even at that time, for instance, the internet was just coming into something that was into being in the mid-90s, at least on a mass consumer level. Mm-hmm. And so communication around the world was beginning to change. And here you were, already several years established in bringing musical acts from around the world into the London, Ontario community. Mm-hmm. How were you communicating with them and convincing them to come here?
Well, the very first years were very difficult and it's still difficult. I tell you, after 21 years, sometimes it's still challenging. But the main challenge always was London, Ontario, London. At that moment, the musical community, what we call the world music community in Canada, wasn't as extensive as it is right now. So I basically have to search for these groups, or based on recommendations from some people that I happen to know working in that field. So it was challenging in finding the groups, and it was challenging, dealing with agents, managers at that time, because sometimes they were not even quite sure if the festival that we were doing was the right venue for them, because there is the issue of credibility sometimes, right? You have to build this profile. It happens the same if you want to apply to a grant to Ontario Arts Council or Canada Council. You have to show them, first of all, a record of history of what you've done, so that you eventually they say, oh yeah, this person has done this, so he can qualify for this. And it was exactly the same in the festival field. They some of the artists say, well, we're not quite sure we want to play the festival because it just started, and blah blah blah. So it was challenging at the beginning, But again, when the artists start coming here and experiencing, the good vibe and the beauty of the park and the hospitality, that kind of stuff, they start becoming some of the best promoters for the festival. Start telling their musicians, friends, and other people, how beautiful the festival was and so on. And so 1988, 1999, we were already, creating a big buzz across the country and saying, oh yeah, that's a new festival, but it's a good quality festival. And the best thing was that it was, and it's still one of the very few what we call world music festivals. A lot of the big festivals in Canada complement their programming with world music acts, but in our case, that's our primary goal. Now we are complementing our program with jazz, but and that's what really made the festival stand out, from the rest. Oh yeah, Sunfest is really a world music festival, and that's when it started getting in the attention of agents and artists, interested in coming to play the festival. Of course, all those initial years, our budget was always very tight, very, very, very tiny, and still, we have grown tremendously, but the more that you grow and the more the profile, gets more recognized all over the world, the more challenging becomes sometimes in putting together the artistic programming, because, you get a lot of requests and people interest from some of the most spectacular groups, but sometimes, their fees are so high that it's difficult to accommodate that. But so it was challenging, definitely, the first 5 years of the festival, finding groups, making the connections. But then you just got the feeling after a while that now we're in the right mood, we're moving, other colleagues are recognizing you, and the rest, it was a matter of continue building all those relationships.
What do you remember about that first festival or two of who the acts were and where they were coming from?
The majority of acts were coming from Toronto. We had 2 acts from London. There was a nice klezmer band at that time in London, and I played with my band, the salsa band.
Right.
The first year we said, but something that really created another sensation in London was that, Canadians are number 1 tourist in Cuba. Okay, so every year, at the time springtime, always so many emails and phone calls from people who go to Cuba and said they go to all those resorts. And of course, they see all these musical groups there, and people say, oh, we saw this fantastic band, they want to come, and and I know the kind of band that they are talking about. Anyway, in 1995, there was this lady, who went to Cuba to one of the resorts, and then she came back and said, you know what, I love that group that I saw in that resort, and they want to come, and I'll take care of everything. If you put that festival, I'll bring that group. And I said, well, do you have any audios, anything like that? And of course, all the musicians in Cuba are fantastic. Number 1 in the whole world, the musicianship is the highest one. Of course, they're not well known at all, but good musicianship. And I said, you know what? Let's do it. I think this is going to create another buzz about the festival, that for the first time ever in Canada, a group from Cuba coming to play to London, Ontario. And here we go. The group came, and that was our first international guest, such and such a group from Cuba. It was just, so everyone was interested. Oh yeah, they're coming from Cuba. Yeah, that's that big thing of, first time that an international group is coming, of this nature. The group was fantastic. It was really good, and of course, but the majority of acts were coming from the Toronto area. Groups that I have been able to met, in the previous concert series, prior to the festival. So many of those groups, I say, we want to create this festival. Give us a break in your fees, and and all of them say, oh yeah, we want to be part of this initial movement. And they were very generous in that way, and so we ended putting a very nice lineup, of I think 12 to 15 groups. It was very nice and as I said, professionally done.
What goes into the process of putting together the entertainment lineup now, with the scale that the festival has reached, and the additional challenge of now you've gone all around the world probably several times, building the relationships with a lot of these acts. So wanting to keep it fresh but also diverse. But describe for me, if you would, Alfredo, the process, because I'm guessing it probably takes most of the year to build the entertainment lineup for the Sunfest Summer Festival. What's it like?
Oh, no question about that. It's an intense process. It's a long process. Now, with the state of world music in Canada and all over the world, I mean, you have more choices, many more choices for sure. You have a lot of submissions that are not necessarily requested, and we got a lot of promotional materials from groups, not only from Canada, from all over the world, and so in one way you have all kinds of alternatives and choices, but on the other hand, it makes it difficult as well, because you would love to have all those groups at the festival, but it's still one of our main challenges is still, the financial aspect. We have grown tremendously, in terms of the artistic fees that we pay and the artistic budget. But still, we are not yet at that level when we can say, we're going to bring, more and more. But it happens through different ways. One way is unsolicited submissions. People send us their stuff. The other way is by recommendations by our colleagues, that other festivals that say, you should have this group because this group is good. But I think the most interesting one is going to the different music markets. I've been fortunate enough that, especially in the last 10 years, and because of the profile of the festival, I get all kinds of invitations now to go to different markets all over the world. And the whole idea is that they will cover all your expenses, flights, accommodations, hotels. And the idea is you go there, see the groups, and hopefully you'll be able to bring some of those groups back to Canada. And that's exactly what I've been doing in the last 10 years, going to all these places. And morally I feel responsible, and committed to many of these institutions, because they're investing in you by bringing you over there. But I also feel morally committed in bringing some of the groups over here. And of course there is a network of festivals, Canadian festivals as well, that we get together once, twice per year. And that's another way of sharing resources and sharing feedbacks of specific groups. So, but all of that together, it takes over a year sometimes. Sometimes you have you even create a kind of a waiting list, a wish waiting list, that just hoping that those groups are going to be touring by the time that the festival is on. But it doesn't necessarily happen all the time. So it's a long process. It's an interesting process. A lot of people ask me that question. How did you guys get connected with all this? Where did you find all these groups? And it is through all of these things, that we were able to connect with many people and many artists, and we definitely are enjoying now an incredible reputation, among the best world music festivals in the whole world, period. I don't think in North America itself there are not that many world music festivals as such, and definitely one that stands out in Canada, it's our festival.
What does it feel like, Alfredo, with everything that you described at the outset of this conversation in mind, and holding on to your genuine love and appreciation for music as your light to follow through all of that, into creating something that nobody else was able to see, or maybe a very small group of people other than yourself, to bringing that into reality, to all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but I think you catch my meaning, finding yourself in another part of the world where people that have the same passion for music in their own way that maybe you have laid out the red carpet to say, here's somebody that we want to be associated with, and all of a sudden you're there in a different corner of the earth, having been invited to experience another act, and people with a passion for music that want to be connected with you. What's that feel like?
It is an incredible feeling, Kevin. It is, because in one way it's an incredible satisfaction, because in a way your peers, your colleagues are recognizing, the crucial role that you have played, not only in this community, but in the world music community, let's say, and the importance that this festival, a lot of groups organize their tours around us when they said, if you book us, we will do the rest, and that's been now, the pattern from the last 10 years. We book the groups and then they connect with other festivals on their own, but they use Sunfest as their main point and then expand themselves into other communities. It is so fantastic to see the reaction. I go to one of the biggest world music conferences. It's called WOMEX, World Music Expo, that happens in Europe every year. It tours around. And Canada Council for the Arts always rent a big booth that makes it available to the Canadian festivals. This is a conference with almost 3,000 delegates come from all over the world. There are almost 200 concerts, and there is a huge trade market of almost 700 exhibitors there where you meet agencies and so on. The most amazing thing that has happened in the last years is that because of the profile of the festival, the number of people that come to see us at that booth at Canada Council, it's unbelievable. Sometimes even people from Canada Council say, we are working here more like your receptionist secretary, because people come here to look for you, for Sunfest. And people line up to see us. And besides us, we have the biggest festivals in Canada: Montreal Jazz Festival d'été, Winnipeg, Calgary, Vancouver, all of them are there. But what is funny is to see that the people are lining up to see us, not necessarily them. And because they know that, they will inquire with them as well. But they know that this is the festival that many times they want to play, they want to perform. And it's so emotionally speaking, it's so fantastic. The feeling is amazing, because then you see, yes, we have put London on the map through this festival, and no question, this is so beautiful. It is incredible, and even when you go to many of these other markets and people come in and see, thanks for having such and such an artist, I work with them and so on. They had a fantastic time at the festival. It's just so beautiful, Kevin. It's just, and once again, I have to say, Kevin, we're so proud of what we've done in this community. I mean, so proud of the numbers that we reach out for the festival, the artistic lineup, incredible, because many of these artists are truly iconic figures in their own countries. These artists come across the country playing festivals where you have to pay to see them, and here they come to Sunfest. The festival still remains free and accessible to everyone. And always I have said, Sunfest is one of the most beautiful expressions of community, because the most amazing thing that the festival has created is its social impact. This is the only weekend where you'll see that London, it's a complete different community. With everyone comes. It doesn't matter the language they speak, the color of their skin, the different cultural backgrounds, kids, young adults, seniors, everyone. They're just having a fantastic time. And this is the festival that doesn't, go to a specific demographic. This festival is for everyone. And perhaps it's the only weekend among all the other activities that you see in London where you truly see the diversity of people in this community. And that's one of the biggest accomplishments for us, for the work that we've done. And when people, meet me on the streets, it's just so great to see, Sunfest is coming. Sunfest is coming, It's like the weekend, that they are waiting to enjoy the whole world. That's why we call it the global village, because that's what it is.
It definitely is that, and it has grown and expanded in an incredible way. I'm wondering what could possibly be left to do, both with that and for Alfredo in general. You're a man of many talents and lots of passions. And what are some of the things that you're thinking that you might still like to explore?
Well, one of my next vision always has been I don't know if you have ever been, Kevin, at the Montreal Jazz Festival. The Montreal Jazz Festival has different stages over different blocks. And so people really walk on the streets from one corner to another. There are 4 or 5 different stages. And of course, they also have their indoor venues. But something that I always have ambition is, and I think this is one of the next plans now, to expand the festival into the streets, because Victoria Park now has been maximized. There is no more room really for anything else. And the nice complaint that we hear all the time from people say, it's too many people. It's too busy. We better leave. As a matter of fact, yesterday I was doing a radio show, and then we got a phone call. Someone saying, oh, the music that you're playing is fantastic, but I only have one complaint. I said, yeah, it's not about the music that you're playing. It's about the festival in the park. Yeah, too many people, man. Too many people. Yeah. What are you gonna do with that? We cannot really walk freely there. So you know what? That's a nice problem to have, but we have some plans for the future. So anyway, we're exploring. It's part of the next vision, the next phase. Let's say, continue growing with the festival, because it has. I truly believe it has the potential. So we are exploring this possibility and working with, people in the downtown area, with Tourism London and the City Hall. So just to see if we can make this a reality in the very near future. Because it's funny when people say, when Sunfest is over, it's almost like the summer is gone. It's amazing. I know a lot of friends who work in factories and places like those. They specifically book that weekend, as part of their holidays, vacations, because they don't want to miss the portion of the festival. And those kind of comments, sometimes you feel defeated because you got a negative response from a granting agency or the sponsor, but all of a sudden you find someone on the street that tells you this, and then all of a sudden you are again feeling strongly encouraged. Oh, yeah, this is a great motivation to keep going. So that's part of my vision. I obviously, in order to accomplish that, I have to get the support of my own team, my own organization, and obviously other players in the community. But I think it's an idea that it will be embraced by many, and it will only enhance, continue enhancing the cultural and artistic life of this community.
When I look at it as we wrap things up, or look to, here is somebody that was forced away from your home and then put somewhere that was not very worldly. Those are my words. And so you brought the world to it. And I hope everybody that's in London that's listening to this will get behind it and continue to support it. And the neat thing about the technology that didn't really exist as much back when you started the festival is that now we can post this on something like iTunes, and for all I know, somebody is hearing this in another part of the world, and they already know who Alfredo Caxaj is because they're hoping to get on your lineup or have been before. But I have a question. Given the incredible arc that you've covered in this conversation, I'm really curious. I know that this isn't possible that I'm aware of, but let's just say that you could hop into that time-traveling DeLorean and you could go back in time and talk to yourself as a youngster. Mm-hmm. What would you tell that boy, knowing what you know now? What would you want to say to a younger version of you?
Younger version of me? Well, you have clearly explained, Kevin, things have changed so much that the whole world now is smaller. Technology has helped us to communicate with each other in an easy way, and I think that's the beauty of technology, because obviously it has created so many negative things as well. But in the positive side, I would say to these younger generations, immerse yourself into all these window of opportunities that the world is offering you right now, and those positive things, because that always has been my message, especially to different community groups here. When you come into a country like Canada that is so diverse, so the best way to immerse into this is by being active in the social, political and cultural life of the community. Because otherwise, we won't have any right to complain about this, to complain about that. Let's be part of that. Let's generate. Let's bring our energies and our visions and make this country a much better country for all of us. And that's what I would say to younger generations to avoid. The whole world is there for you. Take advantage of that. Learn from it, and that will make you a much better human being than many. In the world, I think that kind of sensitivity is so crucial now. I always said, Kevin, art is such a powerful vehicle in bringing people together. And we have demonstrated that with the festival. We have accomplished way more with the festival than many other political or religious initiatives in this community. Because when you come to the festival, especially, for example, my own Latin community, you'll see people of different religions, different ideologies. But at the time of the festival, they are there. They're enjoying themselves. They don't care about what the other guys think. We have several of the Latin American vendors that we have. They actually belong to some of those fundamentalist evangelical groups. In those religions, you don't supposed to dance. You don't supposed to do this and that. At the time of the festival, they're serving food and so on and dancing and having a fantastic. It's almost like this is the moment that we can liberate ourselves and be part of the whole world, of the United Nations in the most positive way.
Our natural state, I think. Alfredo, thank you so much for everything that you've done for this community and around the world, and thank you for giving this time to me. You know that I love you and I respect you an incredible amount, and I'm just very grateful that you would set aside this time to share with me. Thank you so much for this, and good luck both with this upcoming year and any of your hopes and dreams going forward. I'm always behind you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I sincerely appreciate it.
To learn more about how to visit, donate to, volunteer, sponsor, or perform as part of Sunfest, please visit www.sunfest.on.ca. And you'll also find that there's a Sunfest music series that runs throughout the year with many different kinds of concert events for you to go and enjoy. You can also follow along with Sunfest on Facebook. Their page is facebook.com/SunfestCanada, and you can link up with them on Twitter as well at Canada Sunfest. As for me, I'd love for you to join me online at kevinbulmer.com. My last name is Bulmer, kevinbulmer.com. NoScheduleMan.com will take you to the same place. Or join me on Facebook or Twitter. Just look for No Schedule Man and you'll find us. Thank you for taking the time to listen. We'll catch you next time on the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little deja vu.